Welcome back with Marty. I'm Brian. Shayna Goldman has joined us to save the week. Shayna, you've got 20 minutes to pull it all back together for us and maybe convince Sabres fans that there is still reason for hope. Now, the easiest way for me to do this is to tell everybody when they look at the standings right now that Buffalo doesn't have 83. They've actually got 87. They've won the games in hand already, so they're sitting there with 87. That means they're one back of Pittsburgh and two back of the Islanders in Florida. From your exhaustive research of all teams' remaining schedules, what picture are you about to paint for us?
Wow, high bar off the bat. Hey,
oh, yeah.
Just saving the Buffalo Sabres season. You have 20 minutes to go. Okay, here's what works for Buffalo. Win, lose, don't make it, right? It's totally okay. Because if we look back to the beginning of the year, nobody expected this team to make the playoffs, right? Like, expectations are something we have to keep in check the entire year and not just make it up as we go along. The same is true for the team like the Devils, right? If the Devils make the playoffs, it's a win. That's what everybody said. And because they finished so high in the standings, everyone's like, well, now they have to do damage. And if they don't, it's a lost year, which is not the case. It's progress. For Buffalo, they still have played meaningful games at this point of the year. Everything's not completely lost, even though there have been a lot of breakdowns. That is a win, right? It's progress. The team is poised to have a big offseason. They have some really smart minds in their front office, so there should be a lot of faith that they can do that. And then they can progress next year and try to actually be a playoff team. And they outlasted the Senators and the Red Wings. So that's a pretty big sign for them too.
Okay. Is the optimism maybe enhanced a little bit of late because of Devon Levi and his 3 games, despite giving up 6, still winning in a shootout? But is they found a goalie type of situation? And is that for next year? Like the college goalies going right to the NHL doesn't happen that often. Where do we see?
So a lot of the times we can look at a team and count up all of their, actual to expected goals against and start doing the math of if they had average goaltending, they would be worth this much more in standing points. The Sabres would improve with average goaltending. Yes. From Devon Levi, they've gotten that. Last night's game did knock him back down. He allowed, 2.6 goals above expected, which kind of wiped out his first start against the Rangers that was so strong. But if you still crunch the numbers, I think he's at 1.88 goals above expected in 3 games, which is above average, which is what you can ask for, right? We're asking for average. We're getting above average. What's important to note is that he has one of the tougher workloads among goalies. I think it's about 3.06 expected goals against per 60 in all situations he's facing, which is a lot. So it's a lot of trial by fire. And the fact that he's not completely falling apart, and yes, last night's game was chaos, but the fact that he's standing tall through the majority of his 3 starts, yes, we're talking small samples, but whatever, that's what you have to do in 3 games, is a good sign. Do we know how this is going to progress next year? No, because an NCAA goalie typically does go to the AHL first, but there are instances where teams see their readiness, and that's a Spencer Knight, or they put them in a situation because they know they can handle it, they have faith they can handle it, or they feel that their tandem elsewhere can make up for maybe where this goalie lacks. And that's going to be like the big question, because his development is probably going to be the priority, and there aren't other goalies really standing in his way. So it's going to be pretty intriguing, but a lot of the time we look at goalies, they're not this highly touted out of college, right? The other one that is Spencer Knight, and he's the one that did primarily play in the NHL when he left college. So, this is a good way to get him up to speed on NHL action and give him something to focus on this summer so he is ready for the role next year.
Shayna, do you have a hunch as to then, it kind of goes back to Marty's question. I mean, do you think Levi is going to be one half of the tandem in Buffalo next year with Luukkonen, or is it Comrie in some way because Eric is still under contract? The other thing, and I'm glad you put things into the proper perspective right off the bat, and it's hard to do, and it's definitely hard for me to do because, the playoffs, the gap is too long between years in the playoffs. We all know that. But last summer, when you were looking at the league, it was not a great year to be looking for goaltending in the offseason, right? And Comrie had done everything humanly possible to put himself out there as a viable option. And then we've gone on to realize that this team's focus this year was offense and offensive growth, and that can leave goaltenders in a really tough spot. But here we are now wondering out loud, like, what is it really likely to look like for Buffalo next season?
I would guess, and I'm not a goaltending expert, so I'm making this up as I go along because, like I have said before, only goalies understand goaltending. We're all just trying to figure it out and pick up the pieces around that. I would guess that they're not going to go with 3 goalies next year. I think right now at the end of the year, it really doesn't matter. But Marty, you've said it yourself, there's no point in doing a 3 goalie system because one goalie will be left out of practice and doesn't get the same reps that they should. And it's just like a messier situation than necessary. Next year, what could work for them is kind of shifting around who's at the AHL level, who's at the NHL level to make sure everyone gets equal playing time, practice time, developmental time, and all of that. They have that luxury because they have more than one goalie, but it feels like the net could be Levi's to lose, but there's no reason to put that pressure on him yet. And because the Sabres focus so much was on offense this year, it wouldn't be surprising if this summer we see a little bit more emphasis on defense. The Red Wings approached it the opposite way. Last summer they were all about defense, and now we expect them to go for offense. So if they can do that, goaltending, if they strengthen their defense, there's a little less pressure on goaltending, which might work for Levi or anyone who's in net. So there's a long summer to plan and figure out what they need to do, who's going to progress well, who's going to come out in training camp looking like they can, play at this level, and they can keep shifting around from there. They don't have to commit fully to a tandem if they feel that they're secure elsewhere, that they just need their goalies to be average.
So here's one way that I look at it is because, as Duffer mentioned, last summer was a very thin goalie market. Like there wasn't a lot of options, free agent. We know that Samsonov went to Toronto, and there was the Matt Murray trade that originally was going to come to Buffalo. He nixed that. That didn't happen. Darcy Kemper, Jack Campbell. Like it was those type of goaltenders. There's not a lot of goaltenders this summer either, right? In that market. Would that open the door for the Sabres to say, we have a young goaltender that has shown pretty good, but we could package that to really enhance our defense or enhance something in our roster? I'm talking about Luukkonen. And so what's the value of a guy like Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen for say? Because I don't think Comrie would be fetching much on the market right now, even though I think he would have a good role on the team. What's the value for a guy like Luukkonen in a situation where the goalie market is lower than what it has been over the last few years?
That's a really good question because it feels like no team really knows the value of a goaltender when they trade them. We see it at the deadline. That's why they don't make the move and there's not enough time to adjust for it and all of that. But in the offseason too, like you have a better chance of trading for a goalie in the offseason because you have time for them to study the system, get to know the goalie coaches, get to know everything. So they're not, thrown into the fire mid-season and having to adjust on the fly. But who among us knows what a goalie's worth? The teams don't. General managers don't. General managers, struggle with their evaluations of goaltenders all the time. The thing that I think would help in this case is, one, he has NHL experience, so there's something for them to, rest their hat on there. 2, he's cheap. Teams need cheap talent. General managers are not the best at managing the cap. We know that to be true. And if you're looking for a 1B, it helps to have someone who isn't going to be super expensive and weighing down the cap, because a reclamation project you don't want to invest too much on. The other part of it too is that there have been good reclamation projects around the league. I think some teams can, have a little faith in. You look at Samsonov, you look at Alexander Georgiev, you look at what teams like the Rangers have done with their backups, right? Because they have the goalie coaches there that they know they can get anyone, whether it's a Ranta, a Talbot, there's options out there. So it wouldn't be the worst idea, right? Because when a team gets a surplus of something, what do? You use that to address another area. The Hurricanes can get a million defensemen because they know if they need to trade one, they always can, and bring in what they need elsewhere. So it's not a bad idea if they know that Levi's the goalie of their future. The longer they hold on to Luukkonen, if they know he's not their starter, I think the more the league is going to catch on and have to, lose what you might get in a trade back. You look at the Rangers, how they overplayed their hand with Georgiev a bit. They had 3 goalies. Everyone knew where this was going. They didn't get much back for him in return. So if they could be proactive, that wouldn't hurt.
Mm-hmm. 3rd, a 5th, and a 3rd for Georgiev. So I do wonder, every year is different, obviously, in the offseason, but it is interesting when you try to set the marketplace on a value for certain guys. And just to
Philip Gustafsson was a throw in, right? It was like,
right.
We acquired a goalie, we'll throw a goalie back the other way, and boom, there's a reclamation project.
Yeah, that did not work out particularly well for Ottawa. But as we've seen, Marty, between the Senators, both in Ottawa and Belleville, they seemingly have the market cornered on 30 30% of all goaltenders who've played in North America this year. Holy cow. They've
Close
had
to that. Unofficial numbers right there.
But like, for those who don't know, like the unrestricted class of goaltenders this summer, Martin Jones, Tristan Jarry, Freddie Anderson, Antti Ranta, Cam Talbot once again. I think Marty's finally moved off of Cam Talbot, but I could be wrong. John Quick, Jonas Korpisalo, Aiden Hill, James Reimer. You really do have to ask yourself, Marty, like, what is it worth to pursue these guys? And are you better with a second-year Sabre and Eric Comrie just being the veteran presence?
Yeah, I mean, that's why Shayna had me on her podcast, Too Many Men, because we were talking goaltenders. But I have faith in Eric Comrie, because I felt like this season was such a weird year with having the injury. Then he returns from injury. There's 3 goalies again. How do you recover from missing all that time when you don't have enough practice or playing time to be? And his record has actually been good since returning from the injury. So that's one of the things that I have. But I look at other teams like maybe a Boston, right? Are they willing to trade a Jeremy Swayman now because they have Linus Ullmark, and maybe that Boston bringing in some value in a trade, right? So I think there's going to be some teams, Shayna, that will evaluate their goaltending and maybe expose somebody that you wouldn't think, that because of the market and maybe because of the added value you can put on certain players. Like you watch Boston right now, the top 2 goaltenders in the league. Well, actually they dropped off behind UC Soros, but like the top 2 goalies in the league in goal save above expectation are Ullmark and Swayman per game because of the way the team plays. Is Swayman a goaltender that can be a number 1 and a really good number 1 somewhere?
That's a good question, because like we don't know until they get to play that role. And last year he played that role a little bit more. And that's what's so interesting. Like last year we didn't know who was going to be the starter in Boston. Was it going to be Ullmark or Swayman? And Swayman won the net. This year it was Ullmark. So, yeah. And it's really not a knock to the other. It's just that the other was that much better. Anyone could trade for him. And it depends how Boston's going to proceed. Like we really don't know what their cap situation is going to look like, because we don't know what their roster situation is going to look like. Is Bergeron returning? Is Krejci returning? Is this it? So they have options with Swayman, and it's something that they should use to their advantage. And they could definitely go with, a lower caliber goalie or a less established goalie, let's call it, in Luukkonen as their 1B or their backup, because they have the perfect team in front of the net. They don't need to invest that much in goaltending. It doesn't make enough sense for them to. So they could easily trade a Swayman and then look for, a Luukkonen. So could a team like the Islanders. Varlamov's contract's going to be up this year. The Rangers are really good at identifying backups too. So there's a ton of options out there. It's just that the Sabres have to be willing to take that leap. And that's the big question, which goalie do they have faith in? And what if they feel that Levi's not ready? Do they want to take away options and be down to 1 goalie and then have to search for another? It's really going to be an intriguing situation here.
I agree. And Marty, can you do this real quick? Answer that tweet as far as, is it unfair to compare UPL's development to Ullmark's?
Yeah, it's very unfair, because I feel like UPL has dealt with a lot of injury, has dealt with a COVID year, and
well, Linus had the double hip surgery too, so
yeah, but Linus has had more games played through his development than what UPL is, and look, everybody's obviously saying look at Ullmark and what he's doing in Boston. Again, Boston plays a much different kind of protecting system to the goaltenders, and is in a different plan or position in their succession to winning a cup or playoffs than the Buffalo Sabres were. So I think that's probably where I'm at with that.
Shayna, did you allow yourself enough time? Did I allow you enough time to do quick research on Casey Mittlestadt and his actual value to the Sabres this year?
Yes. So I checked with Evolving Hockey's projections. If he were to be a free agent last year, they projected him to have like a 1-year contract worth, I think it was like 1.2 million, which isn't much. And if he went for term, which we're seeing a lot of teams go for the young players to kind of cut costs and prepare themselves for their playoff window, right? If you have, cost certainty, an 8-year deal will carry cap hit. I think it was 4.2 million, which, isn't too bad. I checked in then with Dom Luszczyszyn's model, and his market value right now is 3.5 million on average over the next 7 years. So it kind of gives you a vibe check of what he could go with. I think if he's going to go for term, you could go in that $3 to $4 million range, but you have to be careful because like they're, one and two centers locked up, and they make, it's a good price. It's 14 million combined just about for the two. So if you get your 3C in with some certainty to like 4 million, I think Filip Chytil's a little bit more of a comparable for that. His, recent contract, Chytil just has a scoring that Mittlestadt doesn't right now. So that's the one difference.
Amazing. There's 13 players making $2.5 million or less this year with 50 points or more. 7 of those are on entry-level contracts, and 2 of them are on 35-plus contracts. That leaves only 4 others: Tage Thompson, Brandon Hagel, Troy Terry, Casey Mittlestadt. So Buffalo's got some good value out of some players this year for sure, as we always do every week with you, Shayna. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Easter. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.